Welcome to the 30th episode of the Gooner Fanzine Arsenal Women podcast. Arsenal are all done and dusted in the WSL for 2024, and this will be our final episode of the year as well because Christmas is approaching, and I think come the end of December, we're not going to have loads to talk about. So we're going to wait till the first week of January. And it's a January that's shaping up now for Arsenal with games in three different competitions. We're going to touch on the Conti Cup. Oh, there we go. He's done it already. Not the Conti Cup, the Subway Cup. It's going to take a bit of getting used to. And
I didn't
that's.
even go to correct you then at all either. I went
No.
with it.
It's been really hard. I've already had to, on my notes, I've written down talk about the Conti Cup draw and then scribbled it out and replaced it with Subway. So Subway, you're going to have to do some very good marketing to get that ingrained into our heads. But we're going to talk about that, who Arsenal have come up against. But we're going to start with the Liverpool game. Daisy, we were both there. I was in the press box. You were in the away end. Felt like one of those where the result is more important than the performance, and especially when you look at the other results in the WSL yesterday and the day before.
Yeah, absolutely. We were watching the keeping a close eye on the Everton City game. We'd watched that before even went down to the ground, and then had about three different streams at different times trying to, keep track of the score. But as soon as that was finished, I think I went into it very much. People were going into it saying 3-4, 5-0. I was going into it saying 3 points, whatever it takes. Obviously, we was keeping an eye on Manchester United, who play in Palace, kind of maybe expected them to get a few more goals on the score sheet there, because obviously goal difference does play a huge part in the WSL. We saw that last season with Chelsea and City. So obviously, we're keeping an eye on that too. But I think anyone who thought that Liverpool wasn't going to be a tough test, I think maybe a little bit naive. I know we've been really good, but we've had, even Valerenga at times gave us a tough competition. And I think obviously we compared Liverpool and Valerenga in a way to the way that they played. But I thought in terms of Liverpool, they can't be too disheartened with that. I did think they had a very good performance in general. I think I hadn't listened too much about what Matt Beard had said, but I'm sure he was quite, happy with the way that the game had gone in general, maybe not finishing their chances so much. But in terms of Arsenal, look, we've had a lot of things to talk about, goals wise, praising the high score lines, finishing chances. I don't think necessarily we were terrible yesterday by any means, obviously not up to the standards that we'd set for ourselves, but we can't be too disheartened with that because that's one of the games I think if we look back, we probably would have drawn. And we would have, similar to Man United, really, we would have drawn that game and come out of it a bit disappointed. So, yeah, got to take the 3 points, and obviously we're looking forward to an even tougher test come Wednesday.
Yeah, there's. I'm not quite sure how I feel about the result, in all honesty, because it's very easy to say Liverpool deserves something. And I think when Daphne Van Domselaar kicks the ball straight at Olivia Smith and Katie McCabe heads across back onto her own post, you definitely think so. But if Mariona puts that penalty away just after Russo scored, I think you are looking at a very different game. So probably both teams rode their luck to an extent. Matt Beard was frustrated by the end. There was one counter attack where, and he was down quite close to us, and he just said that's so soft from us, and that's how he felt. Probably there were times where Arsenal were there for the taking, and Liverpool probably missed out. They, without some key players in attack, as a lot of sides in the WSL are at the moment, and he was very scathing after the game about sort of some of the scheduling in terms of the FIFA windows and the international players who, predominantly the ones he's missing at the moment. But Liverpool always give Arsenal a tough challenge. They beat us on the opening day of last season. Obviously, we won in Tranmere. Um, in the reverse fixture, but I think both goals came in the second half in that game, and Liverpool had their chances there too. I thought they played really well. I thought from the outset they were passing well, they were playing through our press really well, and they were looking to exploit, particularly down their left hand side when Smith and Taylor Hind, who's one of the really underrated players in the WSL, and those two I thought linked up really well, and they certainly delivered a good performance, but. I think you look at it in between Valerenga away, Bayern Munich. We know what's riding on that game, and we know we're going to have to play better than that against Bayern Munich on Wednesday. But I think to see the other two sides who've played in the Champions League both drop points in their WSL away game, Arsenal not falling into that trend is quite a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we're obviously very aware that the gap is closing on Manchester City. I think there's going to be a lot of talk about Manchester City, how they bounce back. They've got obviously, I think it's Barcelona, isn't it, coming up? They've got a a tough test to decide their Champions League group. And I think obviously in terms of the league, we're only 1 point behind them now, but we're still looking at somehow a 7 point gap on Chelsea. So obviously there's going to be pressure, but we know that Chelsea had pressure before last season. You know, they obviously lost that game to Liverpool and they still did what it needed to take. Look, I don't want to be too cliche and say we're only focusing on us because we're definitely not, because we celebrated those Everton goals too much to say that we're only focusing on us. But in terms of obviously we don't know what's going to happen with Renee. We've got this game coming up on Wednesday. 100% it was about winning yesterday and we did just that. People obviously are going to be a bit critical because they're used to these positive performances, they're used to the high score lines. I still thought there was, like you say, especially with the Mariona penalty, there was much to take from that game had it gone our way and she'd have scored it. I do think we would have scored more. And I do think it was a tough test. I don't think if we're looking at sort of the likes of Villa, Brighton, I do think we don't put Liverpool in that category really. I kind of see them a little bit higher up, more closer towards sort of your Cities and your Chelseas in that way. But yeah, I think obviously we'll get into Bayern as well. I think that is going to be a different kind of a challenge. But we know Bayern like to attack, so I do think there's going to be more opportunities for Arsenal to have more space in sort of countering or building an attack. I thought Liverpool nullified sort of the passing through the midfield really well. You know, Arsenal have done that so much, sort of that tiki-taka kind of play through the middle, pass and move football. It's basically a key, strategy under Renee Slagers, but I do think Liverpool did extremely well at stopping that. They cut out a number of passes in midfield that probably could have led to Arsenal creating more opportunities and potentially even a higher scoreline. So you got to give it to them in that sense. But we do know we can expect similar from Bayern's midfield, so I'm keeping an eye on that as well.
Yeah, I think Marnham is probably the worst we've seen of her for a while, and that's probably credit to Liverpool. I think there's probably a couple of chances she should do better. I think there was one maybe 5 minutes into the second half where it fell kindly to her just after Mead had an effort deflected onto the post. But one thing I sort of ran out of time to ask Rene about was Ford and Mead sort of playing on the opposite sides to where you would usually imagine they will, and where they would usually have the most joy. And a lot of the time, even when they do swap, they'll often swap back and be quite fluid in the game, but they were very rigid. They didn't swap at all while they were both on the pitch. Mead was quite frustrated with some of the lack of service in the first half. She was playing very, very wide against Liverpool's back five, and they were very well organised. But that was a little bit confusing to me as to why maybe they didn't look to mix things up, the two wingers.
Yeah, definitely. And I think obviously we've talked about that combination of wingers that Arsenal have chosen to play. You know, we've had Mariona out on the wing, we've had me sitting on the bench. I think Caitlin Ford's been fantastic in general. I think we've seen a lot more from her than maybe last season when we were so frustrated. She would kind of run and then pass back a little bit more. So I still think we're getting more from her in that sense. There's one frustration that comes like that sticks out for me with these wingers is the offsides. I don't know if like people have been clocking it, but we've been called offside with those
There were
passes
some
back.
dodgy calls though. I'll have to
Very dodgy
counteract
calls.
you.
Yeah, we're having a real sort of scrap with the lineswoman on our side, but there's been some times where you're thinking, we are offside there and we shouldn't be. And I think Arsenal need to obviously look at that a little bit more. Yes, dodgy decisions can go against us, but in general, there's moments where it's so frustrating to watch because you can see the space opening up. You can see the idea, switching the ball to the other side. Leah Williamson tried that so much yesterday and it didn't always come off. But I think the offsides when you can clearly see that they are offside and that that's such a big part of Arsenal's play and it is kind of frustrating in that sense. I don't think we're seeing as much maybe from Beth Mead that we would like. I don't know if she's sort of in a sort of a not so good patch at the moment, but I still think there's so much positives to take from that, and I'm still indecisive about the Mariona role, whether I prefer a kind of out wide, causing trouble with Ford on the wing, or if she's kind of done quite well in that midfield role as well. So it's kind of a difficult one to decide.
Hmm. A word on Kim Little coming back in the second half. I think Arsenal were probably always going to introduce her, but I think her role became a lot more important given the context of the game. And we know she's going to come in and help settle in midfield. And it was really nice to see her at half time. She was waving up to somebody behind us, and I thought, who could that be? Because I'm very nosy in the press box. I keep an eye on a lot of different things, and that's what we've got to do. And I looked up, and there's Jen Beattie with a big smile waving back at her. And I think once the Arsenal fans clocked she was there was a load of singing towards her, which is a really nice moment. But it was almost like, right, Jen's here. We're not going to concede any silly goals. That would have been a perfect game where you could have sort of thrown her on. But having Kim there in the middle of the park, that experience, you'd certainly expect her to start against Bayern, and she just helped settle things down a little bit because one big area for me was Arsenal's game management, sort of last 15 minutes, even when Katie McCabe had the chance to make it two and just took the ball to the corner flag. I really liked that actually in the context of the game, and I do think Arsenal, as the second half went on, as much as Liverpool made it nervy, I think probably Liverpool's best moments came probably in the first hour, and I thought Kim was a big part of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can praise Renee's substitutions in general, across all of the games that we've seen. We've talked about it a lot, kind of the likes of who are we going to utilise. We've seen her turn to the likes of Lena Hurtig, Stina Blackstenius pretty much every single time. And a different kind of and obviously she's turned defensively. I think Wibben Moyes come on a few times to solidify the game. She did yesterday as well, I'm sure. So I think Kim Little is there's not we're running out of things that we can really say about her. I think if you're an Arsenal fan, and you kind of know what to expect because every time she's on the pitch, whether she starts or comes, rarely comes as on as a substitute, she performs. I don't think we've ever kind of looked at it and thought, oh, Kim Little's not performing well or not doing her job. The slide tackle that came in against that Liverpool player, I think was just it just summed it up really because that's the kind of performance that you need. Obviously, I think Liverpool did make it difficult for Arsenal's midfield, so it's kind of hard to judge off that. But if we're talking about Bayern, where the midfield test is going to be huge, I think that makes or breaks the game, and I think it broke the game against Bayern when we lost 5-2. I think we didn't win that. We were defensively poor, but we also didn't win the midfield battle at all. So I think Kyra's done fantastic. I thought she was great again yesterday. I wonder if potentially Renee will consider moving Mariona back out wide, slotting Kim Little in. We know that Leah Volti potentially isn't fit for that Bayern game. Reflecting back on Champions League games where Leah Volti's come back in also and done such a good job, I think you need a presence like Kim Little in that midfield against a team like Bayern. We don't want too many attacking options in terms of, not being able to stand strong defensively, and I think Kim does that job. And she also brings such a sense of calmness into the team as a whole, which is going to help us hugely. And I'd be very surprised if I think the only reason she wouldn't start would be a fitness concern, but I'm sure, it might be a case of Renee playing her for X amount of minutes to start with and then bringing her off depending on the result.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised, as you say, if it's not Kim and Kyra Cooney-Cross starting in midfield Wednesday night. Look, I sat in Matt Beard's press conference after, and he's one of those managers who I've just got a real soft spot for, and a lot of people do actually. And he always speaks his mind. He's got that sort of non-league feel about him, where he sort of just comes in and he's swearing about journalists who he hasn't seen for ages, and in a nice way, and he's just having very chatty with everyone, having catch-ups with journalists after, which was really nice. And sometimes I can take that cynically, but I think after a defeat as well, when you could come in and sulk, I thought it was really nice to see. And he's someone who, he's been in the WSL a long time. He's won the WSL, and he said unprompted, he was asked about sort of did he feel that City and Chelsea dropping points would that affect Arsenal's game plan and henceforth Liverpool's game plan? And before he even answered the question, he said, "I hope Renee gets the job. She's done a fantastic job. It's night and day from Jonas's Arsenal to what I'm seeing. I was speaking to the staff and some of the players. You can see they're enjoying their football again. She's done a fantastic job, and I hope she gets it. I really do." So this was rather unprompted. That's someone who has seen Arsenal's transformation and has almost urged Arsenal to give her the job, that unprompted. How much does that say to you, for someone with that experience? And, we're not going to say he's like the best manager in the league or anything at the moment, but for him to come out and feel, I'm going to go and praise Renee and be complimentary. And it also gave me then the opportunity to put those questions to Renee, and she was a bit like, oh, she's probably fuming with Matt that he's then had to give her that opportunity because we can then all go on. Have you heard what Matt said about you? But what were your thoughts when you read those comments?
Yeah, I think it's huge that a manager can come out and speak like that. Obviously, the press conferences with Renee have been great, but we've got little from her about how she's feeling about the future. She refuses to talk about it. She always references the present. So for someone, in that sort of senior position to come out and say that, I think as fans, journalists, anyone who's following Arsenal or following from the outside has said, it'd be very hard for you to stand here and say, and give a solid reason why not to give Renee the job. But it means so much more coming from someone who understands the league, who understands the game, who understands the pressure of being a manager and what it takes. I think we've talked about kind of what the reasons might be for not giving Renee the job. Potentially, we said it might have been her that was, sort of deciding whether she was ready to take that kind of job. I also think, how much confidence that must instill in her, hearing that from him. I mean, I know like she's, very much capable of believing in herself and she's got the right support system around her, but for me, if I was her and somebody else of that level was sort of coming out and saying that so openly, it would be a huge confidence boost. We saw Renee interacting with the fans as well, which I know she referenced as well, was huge to what they're doing in there. And we backed Arsenal through thick and thin. So I do think everything is falling into her favour. It obviously means now that you sort of going to ask the next question, I know kind of about what that means going forward. And I do think obviously, despite what happens on Wednesday, she's got a huge sort of foundation to go off, and I don't think you can really just base it off that one game. I think we've had people have said it's been easy opposition, but we've had tough tests. It's not always been easy. We didn't expect Brighton to be easy. We didn't expect Liverpool to be easy by any means. United maybe the odd one out in there. We've had some tough Champions League fixtures, so really, I think one game, it doesn't come down to one game. Obviously, you've got to consider the 11 games I think it will be once she's played Bayern as a whole. But yeah, it's going to be a tough test and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, it's interesting because if she came in and say her first game was Bayern, or a team of that ilk, for instance, or if she had to play Man City or Chelsea early on in her tenure, then maybe we'd have learned a lot more, and it would have maybe, say if we got turned over by a Chelsea, if the fixtures had thrown that up, and I think we'd have all gone, okay, yeah, it's definitely time for a change. But she's obviously had a lot of time to put things in place, get Arsenal into a very good stage, where it feels like if we do, hypothetically, get thrashed by Bayern, I don't think that's enough evidence for us to say, well, we've got to go back to square one and get someone else in. So it's how the fixtures have fallen, I think, has made this game less important because for one, Arsenal are already through. And two, Renee's unbeaten. And the numbers, even if Arsenal don't win on Wednesday night, the numbers are still very much in her favour. And I think probably those comments from Matt Beard have come at a good time as well, because he said, I've seen enough, in terms of Arsenal's league transformation. Just wanted to touch on what he said as well. She's been there for 2 months, and a week in. When we played West Ham away, I said to Rayanne Skinner, I said, did you expect Arsenal to change a lot under their interim manager, or were you pretty unsurprised? And she said that was exactly what we expected from Arsenal. And at that point, I was saying to you, they're too similar to Jonas at the moment. We probably need to look at going down another route. But for him to now say, they're night and day to where we were under Jonas, even if maybe as fans we look at it and go, it's fairly similar, she's tweaked a few things. For a manager to actually say there's such a big difference, do you think that's tactical, or does he sense maybe the mood around the camp and other things? Because that's quite a big claim to make, to say how different Arsenal are to where they were 2 months ago.
Yeah, I think he senses it as a whole, and it's hard to kind of ignore that. I talked like about the tactics. I've talked about the kind of the mental side of that, the confidence, the player confidence and individual talent that we've seen, and we've seen improvements in individual performances. I think obviously we sat there against West Ham and also admitted, despite it only having been only second, was it a second game? It wasn't long into her tenure
Yeah,
at the time. Yeah, that we didn't feel like it was fair to stand there and judge her at that point. Obviously, that feels like yesterday, but also it was quite a long time ago now. And obviously, we've seen a number of games now. We're getting to the point where we can kind of actually see it as a whole. I think it's hard to judge that early in her reign. She had a lot to do. And I think maybe potentially she might have seen that as a turning point, or at least something to build from. We'd seen that we were kind of quite similar to how we were playing before, but now we're kind of moving into a different style of football, maybe a little more bit more recognisable for the way that Renee wants to play. So I think it's only fair to give it time. And then obviously reflecting on what that means in terms of Bayern, you can't take that as one game either. I think even if Arsenal don't win that game, or they draw that game, or it's not as a confident 3-4-0 victory, I do think there will be little chance that Arsenal will be poor in that game. I don't expect a poor performance. I think that's something that we need to look at as well. We've not really seen many bad performances despite results. And I think going into Bayern, I'll be very surprised if it's not a solid performance. Bayern are a tough team. If they win, I expect it to be because of their sort of individual moments or, how good they are as a team and not a reflection of how poor Arsenal were. If we reflect back to the 5-2, I think a lot of that was a reflection of how poor Arsenal were, as much as it was Bayern being very good that day.
Yeah, Bayern are a weird one for me because I'm wary that we probably made them look a lot better than they were. You know, it was 2-2 in that game. There was a bit of a late collapse from Arsenal. So I think framing them as sort of a juggernaut where actually, this is the game where we're really going to see Rene tested against the big team. I think we've seen challenges along the way, in different ways. And of course, the squad Bayern have got, you've referenced their midfield and some of the threats they'll have. Of course, there are challenges there. But I think for Arsenal to have been such a better place to take them on now. I think you make Arsenal favourites. I
Yeah.
think you do. I think at Meadow Park, we've talked about obviously being moved from the Emirates, but I think Arsenal will really harness that. And obviously, we touched on Valerenga. Bayern drew 1-1 there. So that I think you can read into that a little bit as well. That they beat Juventus 4-0. Arsenal also, dispatched Juventus, and so look, we don't watch loads of the Frauen Bundesliga. I'll point you toward people like Liberty Simons who do for more valued information than us, but it's not a Barcelona or a Lyon in that sense, where obviously, we'll be hoping to avoid them or we'll have to come up against them later on in the Champions League. And that's the thinking is we need to actually judge in terms of the challenging games we are going to have later on this season. This is going to be a little indication as to do we want to trust Rene 4 games of this ilk later on in the season.
Yeah, and I think also like in terms of what we see come, we talked about it, the run of games that we've got coming up next. I think yes, you can't compare Bayern to the likes of Chelsea. I would say Manchester City, but I'm talking more about the Manchester City that we've seen, come up against us recently. They've always been a tough opposition in recent times, and I think it's not the same as that, but also it does kind of show what to expect maybe from Rene in those games, maybe a little bit more than the likes of Brighton, and Villa and that kind of teams that didn't really bring much to Arsenal in terms of a challenge. I think we talked so much about defensive stability as well. I think that's kind of where we can measure, instead of measuring sort of the result, I think we're kind of looking at key factors maybe to consider. So how good were we at defensively? Did we switch things up? Did we take our chances? I think for me, what stands out, what I would like to see is the defense. Like obviously, goals win you games, but also you don't concede three in the space of X amount of minutes in a game if you're good defensively. We've improved so much from then, and I don't expect that we. Will crumble, especially you're right at Meadow Park. I don't see that happening. I'm going to jinx it now, but it's going to be huge, yeah, because I think the magnitude of proving the point maybe to other people, to people who are talking about not playing a tough team, and it also sets precedent for should she continue, she's got some, I know it's every game is tough, but she's got some tough games coming up in a row as well. I think we've got, Chelsea, City, and Spurs. That is just crazy scheduling. And I think if she's to get a result and she's to perform well, that does kind of set the baseline. But obviously, it's not quite as much of a challenge as Chelsea say, which I think will be the toughest challenge, for no matter who's in charge for Arsenal this season.
Yeah, defensively was probably one of my worries yesterday, and I think you can put a lot of it down to, flying back from Norway on Thursday night, landing in the early hours of Friday morning, obviously having one training session between then and the Liverpool game. And as I said, Liverpool having some of their own threats going forward. But I think some of the errors just seem to be a little bit uncharacteristic. And obviously Van Domselaar didn't play against Valerenga, but she still travelled, she still sat on the bench in -8, and then flown back that night. So I think you can excuse maybe some of the errors, but you just don't want them to continue, do you? And Arsenal, the good thing is now they do have this bit of time. They know it's the last game of the year, and I think maybe that was a bit of a factor yesterday as well in going. Actually, we have got Bayern soon. It's Liverpool away. Maybe we're not quite at the races. We're nearly done for the year. In fact, we are done for the year now in the WSL. And I think players do have that, in the back of their minds. And sometimes, you can use it as as a bit of a motivating factor, and I'm sure it will be on Wednesday night. But I just think there are elements of probably yesterday that maybe we don't read into too much, and we don't panic too much over Bayern. But obviously, if they become a trend, then you do, and it's just defensively, as you say, that's the only area, probably that's the first thing we want to be focusing on in terms of going into the Bayern game, because there were just a couple of moments yesterday that were quite uncharacteristic.
Yeah, definitely. And even I think the mentality as well. Kyra, I think it was Kyra that did the interview after where she talked about, look, we weren't on it. We weren't on it today. We didn't, that wasn't the best that you can see from us. So clearly the players as well were admitting that. I think we'll see more continuity in the starting 11. I think, like you say, the likes of Van Domselaar, Fox coming back in, those kind of players, they're going to probably continue and play against Bayern, maybe Bar sort of bringing Kimmy in and obviously monitoring centre backs. I know Steph seemed okay, but we've got to keep an eye on that as well. She obviously had a little injury in the game, so more continuity, and I think the players are aware too. Look, this is going to be a different test. It's going to be, they're going to need more from themselves and as a team. So it's nice that they have that kind of that mentality, and they can actually say, okay, we weren't good enough, and we're going to be better on Wednesday.
Let's look at the Subway Cup then. I've got it right this time. Of course, Arsenal have won the last two competitions. They enter at the quarter-final stage along with Manchester City and Chelsea, by virtue of playing in the Champions League group stage, and of course progress from that. Brighton away, quite a fun draw, I think, probably for the neutrals. Having a look at some of the players Brighton have brought in. Of course, Arsenal swept them aside at the Emirates and have a really good record, I think, against the Seagulls as well. Off the top of my head, I remember going there last season. I think I've been there the last two away games against Brighton actually, and obviously we beat them on the last day of last season when Miedemar scored. If Arsenal win, they'll take on either Manchester United or Manchester City. The Brighton game, I'd imagine, will be played in Crawley on either Tuesday, the 22nd of January, or Wednesday, the 23rd. So of course the Man City Man United game is the star showing really of that quarter final. But Brighton away, your first thoughts?
My first thoughts, I think it's a tough one. I think if you're looking at it in terms of like the league, it's a different sort of question. But when you're looking at it in terms of the cup and a cup like I'm gonna have to say the Subway Cup, I'm not
Doesn't
sure
feel right.
I'm quite there with the name yet. But in terms of that cup competition, that actually, could be Brighton's for the taking. I know that's very brave to say now they've drawn Arsenal, but if you're looking at it like a club like Brighton, we saw the likes of a Tottenham Man United FA Cup last year. We've seen, teams get through that competition and they're quite far in it now and they've got a real opportunity here. I definitely think they'll be up for it. We talked about this when we talked about Bristol City. Teams come up against Arsenal and they definitely don't back down, and I don't expect it to be by any means easy. Obviously then, yeah, the other side of the draw, a Manchester derby against, a struggling City and quite a confident Manchester United at the moment in a way. They've had their results go their way. They seem to be building something. Maybe I'd rather play Manchester City, which is saying something, but they've obviously got players missing. They're going to have to do some rotation to even maintain their position in the league in general. They're going to have a much tougher test, I think, than sort of any other team in this competition. And then obviously the other side of the draw had to be Chelsea and their lovely, nice Durham easy draw at home, which I have to drop in there. But yeah, I think obviously going off that, I'm quite confident. I think it depends kind of where Arsenal set their priorities. If we look towards sort of January, February, March, it's going to be a very busy schedule, especially when I was looking forward to March and I was looking at the Champions League, potential cup final, etc. So, yeah, it kind of depends where priorities lie, but also you could say the exact same for the likes of City, Chelsea. It becomes that point in the season where you decide, what would I rather do? What would I rather win? Where do I want to be? Where do I want to put my key players? So that could really decide this cup. I feel, it depends if Arsenal see this as their goal.
So it'll start with Bristol City on the 12th January in the FA Cup, and then it'll be Crystal Palace at home. So a couple of Meadow Park games. Crawley, a nice one as well for any sort of Arsenal fans around London. It's quite easy to get to on the train, so not a bad draw at all in terms of an away game in midweek, and then Chelsea away at the end of January. So a couple of league games and a couple of cup games in there, which is always how it seems to be actually the January schedule. But as you say, it gets packed into February with some of those difficult opponents, and obviously that will get kicked off with Chelsea, just finally, the Subway Cup final will take place at Pride Park, about a 40-minute walk from where I'm currently recording this. So, Arsenal, if there's ever a year to get there, please do, because I'll be here in Derby. I'll be able to walk to the final and cover it. But I don't think I've ever walked to cover an Arsenal women game before from home. So that would be quite something. And it's a 12:15 kickoff, which I know has annoyed a lot of fans, but we have a really good Weatherspoons here. So if Arsenal were to get through and were to win and don't take that, that is purely hypothetical. It's a decent night out on a Sunday night. It can be quiet, but it wouldn't be, for if Arsenal fans were to come up here. So I like the fact they've kept it in the Midlands, as they did obviously with Molineux last year, which was well attended for Arsenal and Chelsea. But yeah, Pride Park. Don't know if you'll have ever been, but I think it's a good final venue.
Yeah, I haven't been. I had a quick look at sort of capacity wise. I saw, quite similar, excuse me, to the Molineux, and I think obviously we took quite a lot of fans there. I thought that was a fantastic day out, a great trip down. Obviously, yeah, like you say, look, I'm not going to sit here and jinx it and say that we'll get there. I was one of the ones who bought the early bird tickets last year. I also did the same for the FA Cup and they got sold. So this is not one where I'm going to sit here and say Arsenal are going to get there by any means. But it's a great competition and it's a running joke along the Arsenal community. I think it's got even funnier now that it's called the Subway Cup. So it just keeps getting better. But I think those hotels will probably be getting booked nearer the time. Like you say, I expect everybody to be staying over the night before and seeing everybody in Weatherspoons again, just like yesterday at 10 a.m. So it's going to be hopefully a good one. Let's get through that first. Obviously, even if you get through that Brighton game, you're looking at a tough semi-final against the Manchester United side potentially. So they get through that. Could really give Arsenal a run. They got to the Cup and FA Cup final and won it last year, so they're going to be up for a trophy and are probably going to be looking at that as a very likely option for them. And then the other side of the draw against the Chelsea side, who obviously need to decide where their priorities lie in winning trophies, probably going to try and go for all four. We'll see how that works, just like it did last year. But yeah, lots to obviously look forward to, and I think yeah, I'm tempted with that one about going, but definitely looking forward to hopefully the final if we do get there. And I might just go as a neutral anyway,
Yeah,
depending on.
that's my plan. If we don't get there, definitely, yeah, go as a fan because, like I say, it's nice and easy. And if anyone needs to crash on a sofa about 40 minutes of the ground, then yeah, make your proposals sweet. But yeah, we'll look at that. The strange one for me, while we're on the subject of cups, is the fact that we obviously complete our Champions League group stage on Wednesday, and then we're not back until mid-March for the knockout stages for the quarterfinals. That seems like a ridiculous amount of time between two rounds.
Yeah, it is, and I think obviously there's a lot of tough sort of games in between, but you kind of wait, for I think that we were talking about it yesterday, the quarter-final draw as well, obviously for the Champions League is
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. The teams that are in there is no real easy draw by any means. It's kind of what you expect, but it's nice to see that it's a reflection of sort of the best teams in Europe. No, the best teams are all there kind of in a way, so yeah, that's going to be interesting. But yeah, lots in between that. And then obviously you've got to fit sort of, I guess, more semi-finals should you get there, quarterfinals, etc. So then also prioritize the league and also don't get injured. And this is what the women's game is like. But yeah, lots to look forward to. And hopefully, we'll get the result on Wednesday and yeah, we'll take it from there, one game at a time and see what happens also obviously with Renee Slagers as well, come that break and coming into the new year.
Yeah, just hoping for a few quiet weeks now. Anyway,
Yeah.
if that's ever possible in the world in which we live in, and Arsenal women. If anyone wants to hear any more of me after this, and not immediately, don't worry, but I'm on the BBC Radio London, London Women's Football Show. Sorry, with Emily Herbert and Emma Jones tomorrow night. Obviously, Emily. A contributor in our online fanzines. She's written in both of those, and I'll be on with her and Emma from 6 until 7 on for the whole show down in the studio in London. So really looking forward to that. So if you want, tune in and you'll be able to listen via catch up as well. I'm sure on BBC Sounds, I think is the place to go. But yeah, tune in from 6 until 7 tomorrow night, and a good time for me to go on as well because I saw Chelsea drop points at Leicester as well. So I'll be able to offer a little bit of Arsenal biased insight into that. It was quite funny. That's the first time I've covered Chelsea at all this season, and the first time they've dropped points. So thank me later,
Yeah,
Arsenal
it's
fans.
clearly both of us there.
Yeah.
I went to watch it, you went in the press and we've kind of jinxed Chelsea. So now I'm thinking might put myself through the torture of watching Chelsea more to see if they drop more points. But, yeah, I think it's going to be great that you're going to be on the show. Lots to talk about as well. Try not to jinx it, please, and say anything about sort of Chelsea dropping points and City, dropping points and Arsenal winning. And we'll go into that Bayern game, and I'll be blaming you if you've gone in all confident. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a good one as well.
Well, two things to do: not get Sophia and Olivia Smith mixed
Yeah.
up, and get the Subway Cup right, not the Conti anymore. But apparently, I've just reading Subway have doubled the money that the Continental Tires were sponsoring. So fair play to them. And yeah, new sponsor. But there we go. An era has ended, and a new one
Yeah.
begins in terms of the League Cup. Daisy, look, great to see you yesterday. Thank you for all of your effort on this year. You'll be attending Renee's press conference tomorrow, so we'll have some coverage to come from you there. And people can also keep an eye out for your latest tactics piece, which I'm going to publish this afternoon when I get a moment on the Guna Fan Team website, and it's up on your Substack as well. But thanks for all of your efforts this year.
No, thank you. It's always fun and yeah, lots to talk about and hopefully everybody enjoys the piece if they check it out. Lots of sort of things that we've discussed on here as well, a couple of other things. But yeah, I can't believe this is the last one. But obviously I'm at the Bayern game as well, so fingers crossed that they don't let me down in person.
Yeah, I am off on holiday, but I will probably keep an eye on the result. Whether I'll watch it, I don't know. But but I'll definitely be catching up the next morning. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
But some things in Vienna are just a little bit more enjoyable than being stuck in watching football. So, but obviously hoping for a 3 points and then hoping for a nice draw by the time we get all the way around to February, and at least that next round being in March, it's a little bit warmer by then as well. But looking forward to getting to all of the games in January and then City away as well. It's worked out quite nicely actually, having four local games when I'm back home. And as we say, I'll try not to curse the cup final at Derby County. But Daisy, enjoy that game on Wednesday. Where are you in the North Bank?
Yeah, always in the north. But I don't know how I just managed to get a ticket from a friend, so I've got to say I got lucky there. But yeah, looking forward to it and fingers crossed for the win.